All rise, veuillez vous lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
L'audience est ouverte.
The presiding judge, court is in session.
Madame la greffière d'audience, veuillez...
Madam Courtroom Officer, could you please call the case?
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Situation in the Republic of Mali in the case of the prosecutor versus Al-Hassan Abdul Aziz Ak Mohammed Ak Mahmoud, case reference ICC 0112-0118, and for the record, we are in open session.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
The presiding judge, thank you very much, Madam Courtroom
Alors,
Officer.
avant de procéder aux présentations,
So before we take the
je vais vous dire
appearances,
deux petites choses.
I would like to say one or two things.
La première,
Firstly,
c'est que, comme c'est la première fois
that because this is the first time that we are seeing each other
2022,
in the year
je voudrais
2022,
présenter à toutes et à tous
I would like to
mes vœux le meilleur
extend my best wishes to
futur.
everybody and wish you very fruitful work.
Madame la greffière, il y a du bruit dans les...
Madam Courtroom Officer, there's some noise in our headsets, message from the English booth. It's the LRV who was using his microphone, moving his microphone around.
Mr. President, it was the sound coming from the WebEx link, but it's been muted now.
Merci beaucoup.
The presiding judge, thank you very
Alors, la
much
deuxième
indeed.
chose,
Now, the second thing that I wanted to
C'est que
say
je voudrais
is that
présenter à toutes et à tous mes excuses
I would like to apologize
pour
to
cette
you all
longue suspension de nos
for
audiences.
the extended suspension of these
Cela
proceedings.
était dû à des circonstances
Now,
vraiment indépendantes de ma
These
volonté.
were circumstances, or put down to circumstances entirely
Je
independent
pense que cette suspension
of my
a permis aux parties
will.
et aux participants
But I believe
de tout le monde
that this suspension of the proceedings
de mieux se préparer
enabled everyone to
le travail
be in a
que
better
nous
position, to be better prepared for the work to be undertaken. So I thank you very much for your understanding in this regard.
Comme tous les jours, nous allons procéder aux présentations. En
As we
commençant
do on a
avec
daily
le
basis, we
procureur.
shall start with the appearances, starting with the Office of the Prosecutor. Mr. Prosecutor, please. Mr. Duterte. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. The Office of the Prosecutor is very happy to see everyone healthy and together in this courtroom today, and would like to make the most of this opportunity, as you did, Mr. President, to extend their greetings to everyone present in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom for this year of work ahead of us. The Office of the Prosecutor is represented today by Madame Yoyoi Yamaguchi to my right and by myself, Mr. Gilles Duterte. Our colleague Florie Huc will be joining us during the day. She was not able to attend first thing this morning, but she will be joining us. I'd like to also take this opportunity to greet everyone in the courtroom and our esteemed colleague, Mr. Doumbia, whom we are very happy to have with us during the hearing today, Maître Mayombo, Maître Nsita, and the other representatives for
Merci beaucoup,
for
Monsieur
the
le
victims.
procureur.
The presiding judge, thank you very much, Mr. Prosecutor, and once again, thank you for your kind words. Now, over to the defence. Ms. Taylor.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. The Defence also extends its greetings to everyone in the courtroom and around the courtroom and wishes everyone the best for the coming year. The defence for Mr. Hassan is represented today by Maitre Julia Bazil, Ms. Leila Abid, Mr. Letta Marchesi, and myself, Melinda Taylor. Thank you very much.
Beaucoup, Maître Taylor.
The presiding judge, thank you very much, Ms. Taylor, and for your best wishes. Now I turn to the legal representative for Victims' Counsel. Mr. Nsita, Mr. President, Your Honours, of course, the legal representatives for victims would also like to extend their greetings to the Chamber and to our learned colleagues for this new year. We'd like to greet everyone in the courtroom and greet the team that is in and around the courtroom, the team that supports us. The victims today are represented at this hearing by Madame Anouk Kermish, by Madame Dipanga Biyeke Prisk, by Maître Julie Goffin, by Maître Mayombo Kosongo, by Maître Seydou Doumbia, who is following us out in the field, and by myself, Maître Fidel Nsita Lubengika, and I thank you. The presiding judge, thank you very much, Maître Nsita, and I also thank you for your good wishes. This morning, we shall be starting with the testimony of, or we shall initially hear the submissions of the legal representative for victims, subsequent to which we will hear testimony of victims. Now, I don't know who shall be addressing the court first in terms of submissions, because I cannot swear the witness in under paragraph 66(1) as they are not yet present, but I shall hand over to the LRVs to see what we shall do. Maître Nsita, yes, Mr. President. We shall initially provide an opening statement by Maître Doumbia Seydou, who shall address the court first, and then Maître Mayongo Kosongo will follow on and bring our submissions to an end. Subsequent to which, according to the schedule of the Chamber, I don't know whether we might have a short break or whether we shall continue. It will be up to Julie Goffin then, who will be examining the victim in chief.
Merci beaucoup, Maître Nsita.
The presiding judge, thank you very much, Maître Nsita. I think the program is clear to everyone present. I would like to welcome Maître Doumbia, and without any further ado, I would like to hand over for the opening statement, and I'd like to point out that Maître Doumbia is not with us, but is following us from afar.
Maître, vous avez la parole.
Maître, it is over to you.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Bonjour, Maître.
The presiding judge. Good morning,
Je ne veux pas
Counsel.
déroger à la règle,
Maître Doumbia.
celle de souhaiter une
I
année
would also like to wish
2022 heureuse et
everyone
bonne
a happy
pour chacun d'entre nous et nos familles.
New Year for the year 2022 for each and every one of us and for our families.
Monsieur le Président, honorable
Mr.
Mesdames les
President,
juges,
your honours.
je suis Maître Seydou
My
Doumbia,
name is Seydou Doumbia,
au barreau du Mali,
and
l'un des représentants
I
légaux
represent
des
the Malian Bar. I am one of the legal representatives for the victims in this case, the prosecutor versus Mr. Al Hassan.
Monsieur le Président, honorable
Mr.
Mesdames les
President, your honours,
à l'entame de mon propos,
allow me
permettez-moi de
At the
m'acquitter de ce
outset,
devoir sacré
to greet you
celui de saluer les uns et les autres
on behalf
dans ce prétoire
of our team
et ailleurs. Au nom de l'ensemble de notre équipe,
and on behalf of all
mais
the
également
victims
au nom
of
des victimes
Timbuktu.
de Tombouctou. Ces victimes suivent avec
Who are attentively
beaucoup d'attention
following
le déroulement
the unfolding
de vos travaux
of this trial
et se félicitent,
and
Monsieur le
who
Président,
praise,
de la sagesse avec
Mr.
laquelle
President,
vous
the
menez votre
wisdom
mission.
with which you are fulfilling your roles.
Je salue également
May I also
nos
greet
estimés collègues,
my esteemed colleagues
les membres du bureau du procureur,
of the Office of the Prosecutor,
pour le travail
and
mené de main de
pay
main.
tribute to their skilled work.
Je n'oublie pas évidemment nos estimés
I am not, of
confrères
course, forgetting
et consoeurs d'en
our
face.
learned friends
J'ai parlé
from the defense.
Enfin,
Finally,
je rends un vibrant hommage
I will pay a vibrant tribute
à tous ces sempiternels présents,
to all those who
mais
are
oubliés du prétoire,
eternally present yet forgotten
Vous qui êtes au
in this
procès.
courtroom.
ce que la corde est pour la ruche,
You are to the courtroom
car
what
en
a
effet,
rope is to a
la
beehive,
sagesse africaine dit,
according to an
la ruche
African
ne prend de la
proverb
hauteur
that
qu'à
says,
l'aide de la
a
corde.
beehive can only gain height with the help of a rope.
Il s'agit bien de vous tous,
You all embody
techniciens,
that rope,
toutes catégories confondues,
whether you be the technicians of all categories,
interprètes,
the interpreters,
sténographes,
the court reporters,
greffiers d'audience,
the court officers,
assistants des
the
juges,
judge's assistants,
assistants et
or
autres intermédiaires.
intermediaries out in the field.
Il s'agit bien de vous, vous sans qui
Without you,
il n'y a simplement
there
pas
is
de
no
procès.
trial, quite simply put.
Il s'agit enfin
And the media
des hommes de médias.
are also instrumental.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Your Honours,
honorables Mesdames les juges, qui sont donc ces victimes
who are the
au nom
victims
desquelles
we are
nous prenons la
representing
parole devant
at
vous ce matin?
today's hearing?
Il s'agit de ces hommes,
We are talking about
de ces femmes,
the men,
de ces enfants
women, and
qui
children
ont été la cible de violations
whose
graves
fundamental
de
rights
leurs droits fondamentaux
were seriously violated
dès le début des
from
années
early
2000
2012 onwards
dans la partie septentrionale de la République du Mali.
in the southern part or in Mali.
Dès
In
le mois de
fact,
janvier,
from the month of January 2012,
le Mali a été la proie
Mali
d'une crise profonde.
fell prey to a deep crisis in the name of the Sharia.
Simple rébellion au départ,
From what was a simple rebellion at the outset,
en force d'occupation,
the armed forces rapidly morphed into a jihadist occupying force
des valeurs
that rode
socio-culturelles
roughshod
et religieuses
over the
d'une
socio-cultural
civilisation
and religious
plusieurs
values
fois centenaire,
of a civilization
celle de
that dates
Tombouctou,
back several
la
hundred
ville des
years.
30
We are
et
talking
333
about Timbuktu, the town of the 333 saints.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
honorable juge,
Your Honours,
les victimes dont vous avez
you have
autorisé
authorized
la participation
1,946 victims to participate
sont au nombre de
in these
1946.
proceedings.
1946.
1,946 in number.
Ces victimes ont subi
These victims have endured various acts of violence,
je cite,
including
flagellation,
flogging, rapes,
esclavage sexuel,
sexual slavery,
mariage forcé
forced marriage,
et d'autres formes
and
de
other
violence
forms of
sexuelle
sexual violence,
dont sont nés d'ailleurs des enfants.
of which children were
Arrestations
born,
et jugements arbitraires,
arrests and arbitrary
ainsi que
judgments,
d'autres violations des
as
droits
well
fondamentaux
as other violations of their fundamental rights and various forms of persecution.
aussi.
In
Certaines
addition,
femmes ont subi
some women
des
have had
préjudices
to suffer
d'ordre
socio-economic and
économico-social
financial harm.
et financier. Nous pouvons à cet égard
The victims
citer les
of
victimes
the
du monument de la
Monument de la Paix, the Peace Monument, are an example of
outre l'aspect
this.
symbolique du monument,
In addition to its symbolic
la
value
paix
as representative of peace
figure
and social cohesion,
l'aspect de la cohésion sociale.
the Peace Monument
Le monument de la paix était
was a place
un lieu de travail
of work
pour les
for
femmes
women
de Tombouctou.
in Timbuktu.
Était le symbole
This symbol
de la
of cohesion and
vivre
coexistence
ensemble et avec l'occupation,
was destroyed
tout a été détruit.
under the occupation,
Les activités des femmes
and the women's
ont été
activities were ground to a halt,
causant ainsi
causing serious material and psychological harm to
et
the women
psychologique,
and
non
their
seulement pour ces femmes,
households,
mais également pour leur foyer. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
je m'en vais à présent vous présenter quelques
I
vues
shall now be presenting to you a number of the victims' views.
Je vais vous entretenir quelques minutes de
Firstly,
l'occupation
for a few moments, I would like to talk
jihadiste
to you about the
Tombouctou.
jihadist occupation of Timbuktu.
L'entrée des djihadistes dans la
The
ville de
arrival of the
Tombouctou
jihadists in Timbuktu
a provoqué une véritable
was
commotion sociale.
accompanied or gave rise to social
L'onde de
upheaval.
choc a atteint
There was a shock
les
wave
contrées les plus
that was as
reculées de la région.
far-reaching as the most remote areas of the
Les
region.
5 cercles de Tombouctou,
The 5 cercles
Tombouctou
of
même,
Timbuktu, Timbuktu
Dire,
itself, Dire,
Niafunké,
Nyafunke,
Gundam,
Gundam,
Gourma-Rarous,
and Gorma Rarus,
et qui regroupe
comprising 51 communes,
furent rapidement
were
soumis.
rapidly subdued.
Au bout d'une semaine,
Over the space of
la
a
ville de
week,
Tombouctou s'est désespérément
Timbuktu rapidly
et drastiquement
emptied
vidée de sa
itself
population.
of its population.
Pour constituer une masse
Resulting in a mass
déplacés
of
internes
internally displaced
qui s'étendait
persons from
toutes les
Timbuktu
villes
to Bamako,
Tombouctou jusqu'à Bamako, la capitale,
the
et de nombreux
capital,
réfugiés
and many other
qui se
refugees
sont dispersés dans les pays voisins,
that dispersed into the neighboring countries, more particularly
Burkina Faso
in Mauritania,
et au Niger.
Burkina Faso, and Niger.
La population restée sur place,
The population that had stayed behind
tristement confinée
was
et résignée,
sadly confined and
était soumise à
resigned
toute
to
forme
enduring myriad forms of cruel,
inhumaine,
inhumane,
dégradante.
and degrading treatment,
Exécution sommaire,
such as summary executions, amputations,
torture sous toutes les formes,
torture under all its
atteinte à la
forms,
dignité de la personne,
outrages upon personal dignity,
flagellation,
flogging, destruction of property,
viol et
rape
violence sexuelle,
and sexual violence,
mariage forcé,
and forced marriages,
j'en passe.
and this list is not
Au nom
exhaustive.
de la religion,
In the name of religion,
les hommes étaient
men were
obligés
obliged to wear
de porter désormais des pantalons,
thenceforth short
ces
trousers
pantalons
cut
coupés
off
au niveau du
at
mollet.
calf length.
Les cigarettes et
Cigarettes and music
étaient interdites.
were forbidden.
Les femmes étaient obligées
The women had to cover their entire
de couvrir
bodies
entièrement tout le corps
and
et de se
had to
départir
avoid all beauty
tout
products
artifice
and embellishing
au lieu de
tricks.
beauté. Ces femmes ne pouvaient plus vaquer
These
à
women
leurs
could no longer go
occupations
about
habituelles
their daily business
de peur d'être
for
persécutées.
fear of being persecuted.
Tout rapprochement
Any
entre
close
un
relations
homme
between
et
a
une
man
femme
and a woman were
interdit,
forbidden
à moins
unless
que
they were
de
justified
justifier
by
d'un lien de mariage.
marriage.
Bref,
In brief,
il n'y avait plus de vie à
the
temps
life
perdu.
as they knew it had ceased to exist.
Les écoles étaient désormais
The
fermées.
schools were closed,
Les enfants ont été
forcing
contraints à la
children to
déscolarisation.
abandon their education.
Les jeunes étaient
Young
obligés
people were
de se
forced
mettre au
to
service
serve the jihadist
de l'occupant
occupiers
sous peine de
or
sanction.
face punishment.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr.
honorable
President,
juge,
Your Honours,
à ce niveau, il me plaît de partager avec vous cette
I would
anecdote
like to share an anecdote with
qui
you,
retrace à la fois
which
la manière dont
goes
les
back
jeunes
to the manner in which
étaient recrutés
the young
pour rejoindre
people
les
were
djihadistes,
recruited to join the jihadists,
mais également c'est
but
l'histoire
also
tragique
reflects the
de
tragic
beaucoup de jeunes
story
dont
of
la
many
vie
young people
a tourné
whose lives
radicalement.
were radically turned on their heads in a short lapse of
L'histoire que
time.
je vais vous raconter est celle
The story that I would like to tell you
d'un jeune homme, j'allais
is
dire de deux
the
jeunes,
story of a young man, or in fact two young men,
des lycéens,
who were
mais qui,
high
à
school
cause
students. But
de l'occupation,
because of the occupation,
ont été obligés
were
d'abandonner
obliged
leur école
to abandon
pour se
their
faire recruter
studies
par les djihadistes
and were
qui
recruited
travaillaient désormais
by the
à leur
jihadists,
service.
for whom they were obliged to work for
Monsieur le
subsequently.
Président,
Mr. President,
le jeune homme que j'ai rencontré à
the young
Tombouctou
man whom I met in
C'était
Timbuktu,
en 2014,
that was in the year 2014,
il avait 18 ans à cette
was
époque.
18 years of age at the time.
À l'époque de l'occupation, je
At
veux
the
dire,
time of the occupation, I mean.
j'ai fait sa connaissance
I met him
lors de l'une de mes nombreuses missions.
during one of my numerous missions to
Et
Timbuktu,
il m'a raconté ceci.
and he told me
Et
the
sur la
following,
faveur de la confiance nouée entre nous.
because of course
Il m'a
there
dit,
was
Maître,
a
est-ce que je
relationship
peux
of
vous dire
trust
quelque
between
chose
us. He said,
et
Counsel,
je peux vous faire confiance?
can I trust you? Can I tell you something?
J'ai dit bien évidemment.
And I said, of course you can.
Je dois dire que nous étions en train de
I should say that
discuter,
we
faire
were
une sorte
talking
de sensibilisation
and raising awareness
les dangers de l'occupation à
of
cette
the
époque-là
dangers of the occupation at
et
that moment
le
in
risque
time,
que couraient justement les jeunes gens.
and the risks that young people might run up against.
Lorsqu'il m'a demandé s'il pouvait me confier
And that's
quelque
when
chose,
he
il m'a dit
asked
ceci.
whether he could confide something in me, and he said the following.
Vous savez,
You
la
know,
vie n'est pas si simple.
life is not as simple as all that.
Même si nous n'aimons pas
Even
cette
if we do
situation,
not like the situation we are in,
quelquefois nous n'avons pas le choix.
sometimes we do not have a choice.
Et le jeune homme de continuer que
And
il
the young
avait
man continued
fait la rencontre d'un
by
autre
saying
jeune
that he had
garçon,
met another young
lui un peu plus âgé que
man,
le premier,
a little bit older than
et
himself.
ceci au sortir de la prière du crépuscule,
when he was coming out of prayer
me disait-il,
at sunset
à la mosquée Sankoré.
at Sankore Mosque.
Le deuxième jeune homme qui lui demande,
The
mais qu'est-ce
second
que vous
young
faites
man
en
asked
cette
him,
période de fermeture des classes?
"What are you doing? Or what are you getting up to during this time when
Maintenant, il était obligé
when
de
there is no
rester auprès de
class?"
ses parents,
To which he
qui
responded
étaient d'un certain âge,
that he had to stay home with his parents,
naturellement,
and that being of a certain age,
personne pour s'en
his
occuper,
parents
étant le premier
were
garçon de la famille.
ill, and he was the firstborn or eldest son of the family. The second boy suggested to him that if he really wanted to help his parents, he could help him to find some work in order for him to be able to better care for his parents, because it serves no purpose to just sit next to your parents if you are not able to pay for any prescriptions to treat their illness. Of course, he was very convinced by what the young man had to say, and he let himself be led by him, and on the next day the young man took him to a gentleman who offered him the position of chauffeur driving his Land Cruiser. Upon parting ways, he gave him the sum of 50,000 CFA, certainly because he wanted to motivate him. The young man was amazed and went back to his parents, explained to them to go to Bamako. I have bought them a house, and they are now no longer in need of anything. My brothers and sisters are at school, and I have been able to pay for all of this. How would I have been able to reach such a level of success if I had not managed to clinch this job? A job working for a jihadist. And he added that he did not regret that he had stopped his education because his whole family was proud of him. And this, Mr. President, Your Honours, is the pathetic story which is similar to the stories of many youths in Timbuktu, and not only Timbuktu, but many youths of this region of northern Mali who joined the jihadists, not because of any conviction, but because, or belief, but because they needed to, out of necessity. So poverty really pushes people into jihadism. So, Mr. President, let's continue with this damage caused by the jihadists. And in so doing, we could not avoid talking about the destruction of mausoleums and other monuments, including places of worship and the tombs of the saints that were destroyed in the city of Timbuktu. The inhabitants of Timbuktu were targeted with this abhorrent formula that says that you have to beat the corpses in order to gain the respect of the living. Timbuktu was, as a result, reduced to a shadow of its former self, and this will be remembered in thousands of years to come. Let's now come to the interpretation of the word Sharia. This word that has been mentioned for such a long time and which we do not always know how to interpret in this trial. The victims would like to draw your attention, Mr. President, Your Honours, to the use of the word Sharia. This word, in everyday language in Timbuktu, of course, designates Islamic law. But the use of this term to justify the occupation, as you can imagine, was but a mere pretext. The jihadists simply intended to enforce Islamic law in the town of Timbuktu, a town that is steeped in Islamic tradition and has been for centuries. This town of 333 saints, which is profoundly anchored in the Muslim faith. And the aim, of course, was to attack this symbolic location and then destroy it for the world to see. Having said that, the word Sharia quite simply means justice in everyday language in Mali. Mali is, of course, a secular country, yet 99% of the population claims to be Muslim. The term Sharia is generally translated as something that is just or in keeping with Islam tradition. It follows that to say that a claim or judgment is not Sharia means that it is not correct. The Sharia, as applied by the jihadists in Timbuktu, involving amputating the hands of a robber or flogging couples in public squares for adultery by way of punishment, has never existed in Timbuktu. The jihadists did not have any knowledge to impart on the practice of the Muslim faith in Timbuktu. What is the perception of rape and sexual violence in Timbuktu? Well, as in most African cultures, sex is taboo in Timbuktu. Rape and sexual violence are seen as an indelible blemish to one's reputation and grounds for being totally outcast. As such, no woman will ever admit to having been raped or subjected to sexual violence, and will always deny the fact or use language that does not reflect what she endured. For example, a raped woman will say that a man hurt her. The bravest women will say that the man forced her to sleep with him, or that he lay down on top of her. Let me give you another anecdote. Once in Timbuktu, I was in contact with a young woman when I was conducting my investigation.
La jeune dame était accompagnée
This young woman was
par
in the
une
company
parente proche
of a close
qui me
relative
servait d'interprète.
who served as an interpreter for me.
Et la jeune dame avait été violée.
The young woman, had been
C'est après
raped,
5 heures d'horloge,
and it was after
5 heures
5
d'entretien,
hours of
qu'elle a
interview
pu me dire enfin
that she was finally able to
qu'elle
tell
avait
me
subi des choses
that
désagréables
she had
de
endured
la part d'un homme.
disagreeable
J'ai alors, même ne
treatment
comprenant pas la langue,
from the hands of a
senti
man.
l'existence
Because I did not understand the language, I felt the level of
expliciter davantage son
insistence
propos, elle
on
pensant
the part of her
que je
relative
n'étais pas en mesure
to explain
de comprendre
what she meant, because she
la
thought I was
gêne ou
not
la réserve
in a
de
position
cette
to
jeune dame.
understand the reserve shown by
J'étais
this
intervenu
young
pour lui
woman.
dire qu'il n'était pas
I
nécessaire
intervened to tell her that it was not necessary to
à
push her
expliciter tout,
to explain everything to
que
me,
j'étais en mesure de
that
comprendre
I was able
déjà
to
passé.
understand what had occurred.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
honorable juge,
Your Honours,
à ces mots, la jeune dame a simplement
the
couvert la tête
young woman quite simply covered her
avec
head
un voile qu'elle portait,
with a veil
n'a
that
plus
she
jamais soulevé
was
les
carrying,
yeux sur le
and she
visage.
never raised her eyes again.
C'est pour vous dire
This is just to
Il n'est pas
explain
facile.
to you that it is
dans la
not
culture de
easy
Tombouctou, excusez-moi,
in the culture of Timbuktu, and I apologize,
pour les femmes de parler de viol,
for women to talk about
de
rape
violence sexuelle.
or sexual violence.
Cette réalité
This
culturelle
cultural
explique en grande
reality
partie
explains,
pourquoi
to a
beaucoup
great
de
extent,
victimes
why many victims
violences
of
sexuelles
rape and other
ne
sexual
participent pas au
violence
processus
do
de
not
justice.
participate in legal proceedings.
Devant les juridictions nationales,
In the national
obstacles sont nombreux.
courts, there are many
et les
obstacles,
conditions de recueil de récits
and the conditions
ne sont pas
of
des plus
witness
faciles.
testimony,
En tout cas, en ce
of
qui
gathering
concerne
witness testimony,
les
are not
victimes
easy.
des violences sexuelles qui ont
And
peine
when it comes to the
s'exprimer
victims of sexual
sans
violence,
entrave
they find it very
psychologique
difficult
d'ordre
to
culturel.
express themselves.
La responsabilité est d'autant plus grande pour la Cour pénale
So,
internationale
it is even more
d'offrir à ces
important
victimes
for the
une
International
voie
Criminal Court
qui leur
to
permette de
offer
donner
these
leur
victims
version
a
des
way of providing their version
faits. Et
of
dans
the
cette voie
facts.
qu'il nous appartient
And
à tous de les accompagner
it is up to us all
et de les
to
représenter.
accompany them and to represent them.
Monsieur le Président, honorable juge,
Mr. President, Your
j'en
Honours,
viens maintenant à la question de la responsabilité
let me
pénale
now talk to you about the criminal
des
responsibility of the jihadist occupiers.
Les victimes participantes à la présente
The
procédure
participating victims
sont
in
d'avis
these
que la
proceedings
responsabilité pénale
are
des
of the
djihadistes
opinion
à
that
la
the
commission
criminal
des multiples
responsibility
violations
of the
dans la
jihadists,
ville de Tombouctou,
those who
et sa
endured
région,
many crimes in
ainsi que
Timbuktu
leur
and its
population
region,
est
and
totale et indiscutable.
is that their criminal responsibility is entire. This criminal responsibility should
Dans les faits,
be sought in the facts, in the behavior, in the words uttered,
les
in
écrits
the
et même le
gestures,
silence
in that which has been written, and even in the silence of the leaders of those jihadist groups who were in power in Timbuktu at the time.
peuvent
These
se soustraire de leur
leaders
responsabilité pénale
cannot avoid
sous aucun prétexte.
criminal responsibility at any costs.
Les victimes ne doutent
The
pas
victims are
que la
in no
justice
doubt
pénale
that the
internationale,
international criminal justice of
justice que
The
vous
Hague,
incarnez,
the justice that you incarnate, is alone
rechercher
capable
et de
of
poursuivre efficacement
successfully prosecuting those who are the most responsible for the numerous dramas that occurred in Timbuktu during the occupation. Now, Mr. President, I would like to outline some of the concerns on the part of the victims. Now, firstly, the security issue, which is their first concern. The security issue, Mr. President, Your Honours, is two-pronged. There is the matter of protecting the lives and physical and psychological well-being of the victims and their families, and that of their participation in the proceedings. As to protecting the lives and physical and psychological well-being of the victims, they are unanimous in saying that they continue to endure acts of violence, abductions, kidnappings, looting, threats of death, etc., etc. They will tell you that they rub shoulders with death on a daily basis, and that their persecutors are still in their midst, capable of causing panic at any time. The second dimension to the security issue is closely associated with the first, namely the participation of the victims in the proceedings. Indeed, the participating victims Mr. President, whom you have, of course, authorized to participate, are only the visible part of the iceberg. In reality, the entire population of Timbuktu was subjected to acts of persecution. Women became imprisoned in their own homes, afraid that if they ventured out, they would be arrested for some random sexist reason inherent to the jihadists' ideology. Mr. President, the entire population was no longer permitted to conduct normal social activities, drink alcohol, smoke, or perform certain rituals. This applied to the entire population. Men were subjected to a very strict dress code, very specific in nature, and they were strictly punished. In cases of non-compliance, many victims did not dare declare their status for fear of being victimized yet again. That is why the victims, who are deeply concerned about their security situation, are questioning the dissuasive role of the International Criminal Court. Another concern is the underrepresentation of these victims. The legal representative for victims regret not having been able to visit Timbuktu
dans les régions du Nord,
or other circles
à Tombouctou singulièrement,
in the region,
mais également à cause de la pandémie de coronavirus.
to meet and register
Ils
victims
n'ont pu faire aucun déplacement
because of the pandemic
sur le terrain,
and the ongoing insecurity in the
encore
region
moins
of northern
dans les
Mali.
cercles de la région.
They were not able to
Rencontrer
visit
et
Timbuktu.
enregistrer les victimes.
They were not able to visit the other circles in the region to meet and register these victims.
Les représentants légaux
As a result,
ressentent
the legal representative for victims feel a sense of unfinished business,
sachant que
as hundreds
des
of
centaines
victims were
de victimes
unable
n'ont pu
to
participer
participate
à la
in
procédure.
this stage of the proceedings.
Les représentants légaux
The
relèvent
LRVs
également
also
un accès
note
difficile
that many victims are hard to access as they are located
dans les
in
zones
far-flung areas where insecurity is rife.
Autre préoccupation, Monsieur
Another
le Président,
concern,
le
Mr.
juge,
President, Your Honours,
il s'agit du petit nombre
is the small
de témoins de
number of victims.
Nous voici, Monsieur le Président, honorable
Mr.
juge,
President, Your Honours,
arrivés au moment de la présentation
it
de
is
la
now
cause
time
des
for the
victimes.
LRVs to present the victim's case.
C'est le moment par
This is
excellence
the ideal
pour
moment
démontrer
to
que la
demonstrate
participation des
that the
victimes
victim's
à la
participation
procédure
in the
n'est pas que
proceedings
symbolique,
is not merely symbolic,
mais que cette
but that
participation
it is
est
effective
effective,
and efficient.
efficace et efficiente. Les circonstances
The
invoquées
circumstances outlined here
ci-dessous, la situation volatile
the volatile situation in the
de la région
regions
de Tombouctou
where the victims
où résident les
reside
victimes,
in Timbuktu,
la pandémie
the
du
pandemic
coronavirus
and the
et les
resulting
restrictions pour les
restrictions
missions
on missions
sur le
to the
terrain
field, as well
où les faits se sont déroulés,
as
ainsi que
trial
l'agenda
chamber
de cette chambre de première instance 10
10's tight schedule
qui prône la
advocating
célérité
speedy
dans la
proceedings
procédure,
means
le
that
temps limité
the LRVs have had a
dans
limited
lequel les
amount of
représentants
time
légaux
in which to
ont pu procéder à
analyze
l'analyse
the
de l'ensemble des 1946
1946 files.
ont été autant de difficultés
There have been many difficulties to overcome
que cette
for the
participation
victims to
ne
be
se résume pas
for the victims' participation to be more than merely symbolic.
certaines chambres de première
Some
instance,
trial chambers, such
comme
as
la
Trial
chambre de
Chamber
première
2,
instance 2,
in the case of the prosecutor versus
Germain
Germain Katanga,
ont bien reconnu
did
que les
indeed
victimes
acknowledge that the victims represented a third voice.
nos clients
Our
restent
clients are
préoccupés
concerned
par
by
cet
this
état de
state of
choses
affairs.
et se demandent si
They
les
wonder
victimes
if victims
occupent
occupy
une place
an
importante
important place
dans l'esprit
in the eyes
des juges
of the
dans
judges
ce
in
procès.
these proceedings.
À ce niveau, Monsieur le Président,
In this regard, Mr. President,
je leur ai dit,
I said to them
ils doivent s'assurer
that
que la justice internationale
they must make sure,
est comme un éléphant dans la savane.
I reassured them by telling them that
Vous savez, Monsieur le
international
Président,
justice is
la
like
savane
an
est
elephant in the savannah.
Il y a un proverbe africain
There is an
qui dit
African proverb that
que
says
celui qui marche après
that
l'éléphant dans
he
la
who
savane
follows
heureuse
an elephant through the grassy savannah is not worried about the dew.
Lorsque j'ai dit cela,
And when I said that, Maître Fidèle added that if you can't suckle your mother, you suckle your grandmother. And my esteemed learned colleague Maître Mayombo translated, saying, if you can't have what you love, you make do with what you have. Mr. President, Your Honours, on this note, I will now hand over to my learned friend, Maître Mayombo, to illustrate some of what I have said, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Maître Doumbia, for your brilliant intervention and your proverbs, which are very clear. I shall now give the floor to Maître Mayombo to follow up.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Your Honour. Your Honours, I'm Maître Kasongo, one of the legal representatives of victims, and I would like to thank the Chamber for having given me the floor following the intervention of my colleague, Maître Doumbia, who illustrated our presence in such a beautiful way this morning, and I would very much like to pay homage, if he is listening, and say that his intervention was extremely clear and excellent, which makes it possible for me to come back to the Chamber to ask you about the timing of my intervention. It won't be very long, with the agreement of the presiding judge and the Chamber. I don't know how much time I have available to illustrate my remarks. Presiding judge, so because the Chamber was informed that your preliminary statement would take an hour, but I don't know how you intended to organize that. Now, what I do know is that we continue to 11 o'clock. That is correct, is it not?
Merci.
Alors,
Maître Kasongo, I've been told that normally you have 18 minutes left. So, take the floor and we will see. Counsel, thank you, Your Honour. That's the reason why I'm addressing the Chamber, to be able to obtain your agreement and the necessary precision. As I stated a moment ago, I am giving my intervention after the best introductory intervention given by Maître Doumbia, my colleague. My brief intervention will be practical, brief, in order to illustrate all the remarks that you heard a moment ago in terms of the profile of victims who are present in these proceedings authorized by your Chamber. My intervention will firstly be based on the allegations linked to buildings, firstly, and secondly, to the alleged facts within the framework of violation of fundamental freedoms, which will illustrate the remarks of my colleague, Maître Doumbia.
Monsieur le Président,
Your Honour,
Mesdames les juges,
Your Honours,
en ce qui concerne le
where it
profil
concerns the profile
des victimes,
of these victims,
en grand nombre, il est clair
with regard to a large number of them, it is clear that
à la quête d'une justice.
they are in search of
Pour
justice.
répondre à la question posée dans le formulaire,
When they reply to the question put in the application form adopted by your chamber, either to question 8,
il s'agit bien du formulaire de
this is the
participation
participation form I'm talking
où
about,
il est demandé
where it is asked
à chacune des victimes
each
participantes
of the victims participating,
la raison de sa
they are
demande
asked the
de
reason
participation.
why they are applying to participate.
En ce terme,
In these terms,
pourquoi la victime
why
souhaite-t-elle participer
does the
à la
victim wish to participate in the proceedings?
et toutes les victimes
And all victims present
se prononcent sur une phrase. J'ouvre les guillemets,
state a sentence.
pour
They say
obtenir
it is in order to obtain justice.
aussi clair que limpide, comme le haut
It's
roche, comme le
very
haut roche.
clear.
Monsieur le Président,
It is as clear
notre Chambre
as
a
water.
principalement consacré
Your Honour,
le principe de la publicité des débats.
there is the
Voilà pourquoi je
principle
précise
of publicity of proceedings, which your chamber has insisted on, and my intervention shall be public,
parce que je vais utiliser
because
des
I
cas
want to use cases
et des propos des victimes
and the words of victims
pour compléter ce qui a été
in order to add
annoncé
to
par Maître Doumbia.
what has already been said by Maître Doumbia.
Il s'agit bien de quelques cas
These are a few cases
exhaustifs
presented in an exhaustive
qui
way,
vont permettre à votre Chambre
which will make it possible for the
d'entrer dans le
chamber
monde de la
to
souffrance
enter into the world of suffering of this mass of victims that we represent.
Ces victimes
Your
que nous
Honours,
représentons
these
sont
victims
celles
that
qui
we
ont vécu
represent
avant de fuir
are those
l'impact de
who
l'occupation
have felt the full impact
en 2000.
of the jihadist occupation in 2012.
En dehors de Tombouctou,
Those who lived outside
c'est sous
Timbuktu
l'appellation des déplacés du Nord.
were called the displaced persons of the north,
Pour celles
and for
qui
those
n'ont pas choisi la
who were not able to flee or did not choose to flee because they remained where they were,
ont été pour leur descendance des saints et leur
They
attachement au culte
were
des ancêtres.
attached to the culture of their ancestors and the religion of their ancestors. And in order to
L'allégation
highlight this, I would stress the allegation made in a
de la victime
form
Abar 45
of
253
victim
18 dans sa déclaration où ressort
A4525318, in which the victim mentions a real tragedy.
pour vous donner ce qu'elle a dit.
To say what she said,
Ma maison se trouvait
my
en face
house
du camp des
was
djihadistes.
opposite the jihadist camp.
Ils s'en sont servis. Ont menacé
They
toute ma
used it, they
famille
threatened my family
avant de violer ma femme.
before raping my wife on several occasions.
S'ensuit notre fuite vers Bamako.
We fled to Bamako from Bujala,
Nous sommes rentrés
and then
après
we
l'opération
went
Serval.
after Opération Serval.
Dans leur majorité,
For the most part, these victims
de la procédure
at this stage of the proceedings,
ont vécu l'occupation djihadiste
they have experienced the jihadist
qui ne leur
occupation,
a pas permis d'exercer un
which made
certain
it
nombre
impossible for them
de leurs droits et
to
libertés fondamentales.
exercise their fundamental rights and freedoms.
Et pour ne pas les citer,
And not to quote them, I would refer
j'ouvre les guillemets,
to what was
La
said.
religion est une affaire personnelle.
Religion is a personal matter.
Oui, en l'espèce.
Yes. Under the aegis of your
Dans sa
chamber.
deuxième question,
In the second question,
question relative à la
a
description
question about the
des
description
crimes
of the crimes
raconte
that the victims
des faits
account,
éclairer la religion de votre
acts which will shed light on the case for the
chambre.
chamber.
Lorsqu'elle exprime ce qui est arrivé
When they express what happened to
dans
them,
votre chambre, vous aurez
to your chamber,
l'opportunité de lier
you will have the opportunity
les faits allégués
to link the alleged
aux crimes
acts
reprochés
to the
de la
crimes
procédure.
at this stage of the proceedings,
Ainsi soumettre à discussion des
and so there will be a discussion of the parties
comme la procédure l'exige.
as proceedings require.
En ce sens,
In this regard,
cas de description
the
de la destruction
case
des
of
mausolées
description of the destruction of the mausolea
seulement
is not only
vécu, mais aussi
what
rapporté
they
par des
experience, but
victimes
it's also
autorisées
reported by
participer aux
victims authorized to participate in the proceedings. In the case in point,
les propos
the words
à barre
of
45
victims
par 18
AB 47
dans sa déclaration
in the statement,
alors qu'il était présent au
while
moment de la
the victim was present during the destruction,
j'ai été attaqué
I was attacked on several occasions
par les rebelles djihadistes.
by the jihadist rebels.
Je suis descendant du saint.
I am a descendant of the
J'ai
saint.
vécu la destruction en
I
2012,
lived through the destruction in 2012,
journée de la démolition de notre
the day of the
mausolée,
demolition of our mausolea,
lieu où est enterré mon ancêtre.
where my ancestors are buried. Your Honour,
Qui me rapporte des récits de
the
destruction
victims testified to destruction in details and with precision in relation to other crimes
et votre chambre à ce stade de la
charged.
procédure
And at this stage of the proceedings,
ne manquera pas de jeter un regard.
it is necessary to shed an eye
Ce sont des faits réellement
on
vécus
these acts. These are
qui ont
acts
fait couler beaucoup
that
de sang,
made
le sang bien
a
sûr,
huge amount of blood be spilled. Blood, of course, of victims.
alors même que parfois
while sometimes
Elle se trouvait surtout en milieu carcéral. Quel est le cas de
it
ce
was
drame
the
vécu
case
durant
of the
l'occupation
drama experienced
dans
in
la
the
nuit du
occupation
248
AB 45718,
déclarant que, je cite,
who stated,
les guillemets,
and here I will quote,
j'ai vécu ces événements en 2012.
I experienced these events in
J'ai été violé par
2012.
deux hommes
I was raped by two men who imprisoned me
pendant un jour.
for a day and a night.
J'ai souffert.
I suffered. I was ill.
C'était par deux hommes armés,
It was by two armed men,
un noir et un blanc. Les faits
a black man
s'assemblent
and a white man.
dans toute la ville de Tombouctou.
These acts had occurred in all of Timbuktu. The names of neighbourhoods, as my colleague said in this table that was so beautifully depicted,
Que les quartiers de
that the neighbourhoods of all the town of Timbuktu were concerned, were affected,
ce qui explique la masse
which explains
des formulaires remplis,
the huge amount of forms that were filled in,
référence à chaque quartier de la ville.
referring to each neighbourhood of the town.
Monsieur le Président,
Your Honour,
le sens de la phrase on est mieux que ce
the
soit,
meaning of the
c'est-à-dire
phrase
dans la maison,
"you are in no better place than at home" had no meaning in 2012.
il s'agit bien du bonheur.
It's of course about happiness, family happiness, the happiness of being able to live in your home with your family, peacefully, calmly,
Qui n'existait pas.
which did not exist in 2012 during the occupation. That is the case
La victime à barre
of victim,
333/19 qui raconte
the victim 20333319, who said, "I'm from Abaraju.
les djihadistes sont venus détruire
The
notre mausolée
jihadists came to destroy our mausoleum,
qui se situe non loin de chez nous.
which is situated not far from our house.
Nous avons quitté la maison pour aller
We left the house to go elsewhere."
Mesdames les juges,
Ladies
Monsieur le Président,
and gentlemen, your honours, the occupation didn't enable the families to live together in peace. It did not allow men and women to live together in peace.
les victimes
For the victims,
qui pouvaient aussi
who
exercer
could
un
also
métier, une
exercise
activité exigeant la circulation,
an
les
activity requiring them to
de ville en
circulate within the town or from town to town.
ce commerce n'a pas été épargné.
These traders were not spared from this.
La plupart ont vu le stock de marchandises
Most of them saw
violer la
their
charia,
goods, which violated Sharia, quite simply destroyed.
Je fais référence
And here I am referring
à ce cas
to this
de la
case
victime à barre
of the victim AB
372 à barre 20 372/19 qui en juin
the
2012
victim who in 2012
signale qu'elle était dans son restaurant
said that
dans un quartier connu,
she was in a
qu'elle
restaurant
était menacée avec arme après la destruction
and
de
she
la
was
mausolée.
threatened with a weapon
Chambre aura l'opportunité
after the destruction of the mausoleum, and your chamber will be able to judge the criminal activity of the jihadists
décrite selon le résumé fourni par
according to their actions.
Voilà
Who,
pourquoi
the
il est
jihadists who were
important
armed in
c'est
groups,
douloureux
and this was so
dans
painful.
votre chambre.
These painful receipts will be given to your chamber.
45,
Victim,
266/18
the different victims, the numbers of which the interpreter does not have,
déclare,
declare,
j'ouvre les guillemets,
and here I open the brackets, I was tortured,
frappé au
I was
commissariat
beaten
de police
at the police commissariat because I was accompanied by my girlfriend who was not veiled. And following that, I left Timbuktu. And I found that my house had been pillaged, whether it was for goods, whether it was for traders, or whether it was for major shops or small ones. The jihadist occupation did not spare anyone at all. And here I quote this case of victim 2502/14. In the allegations, expressed the violation of his rights. In order to share the words with you, I was in my shop when I saw the rebels. They got out brutally and arrested me, saying that I could no longer sell cigarettes. And then they took out all the stock where there were pictures of people, and they told me that I did not fear God, I did not fear Allah. And they told me that I had to stop with this business. Your Honor, it is not just the tears of women and commerce that was stopped, but also men who lived with dishonor, with inability, faced with the situation, because under Rule 85 of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence, of course, it makes, when it comes to the words of that, when it comes to the interruption of the activities or the cessation of fundamental freedoms, in order to answer this question, the exercise consists of reading different operational modes according to the neighborhoods of the town. When it comes to the prohibitions under Sharia. Now, when the veil did not conform to the jihadist reading of the law, the victim had no other alternative. That's the case of another victim, whose number the interpreter does not have, who declares that, and here I quote, the people of Ansar Deen, or I don't know who, jihadists, took me to their commissariat one morning in 2012 to flog me, saying that I wasn't dressed. And victim 4528371, victim 4528118 said the people from Ansar Deen, or I don't know who, maybe it was Acme, I don't know, they took me to the door of my house, the doorway, saying that I wasn't wearing a veil. That was prohibited. And they took me to the commissariat, where I spent 3 nights. And I was flogged. I was tortured. And this treatment is shameful to me. Your Honor, the reason is related to the occupation. The reason for all these exactions or abuses are linked to the armed occupation. For the men who were wearing long trousers, they were subject to bad treatment, and also for women, as I described a moment ago.
Abar 45, Abar 20, 151/19, qui s'est trouvé
The
chez lui
witness 2015119, who was at home in his town,
déclare qu'il est arrivé.
states what happened to him.
Je suis d'Abaret, je suis chez moi, un jour de mois de mai.
I was at home a day in May towards 1700 hours when I saw 4 men come
Me dire que mon pantalon était trop
and
long
tell me that my trousers were too long
et de l'enlever devant les membres de ma famille.
and to take them off before the members of my family who were present, and I refused.
Ils m'ont conduit pendant 3 jours
For 3 days,
en incarcération.
they incarcerated me.
Mesdames les juges,
Your Honour, Your
il
Honours,
y a des scènes de poursuite décrites toujours dans les
there
faits,
are
dans ces formulaires.
proceedings described in these forms in the answers for victims,
Viendrait-elle
for which acts
à participer à ce
they
procédure?
are participating in the proceedings for.
Ces scènes, comme je le disais tout à l'heure,
Namely in question 2. Now, what I was saying a moment ago, this is
sont ponctuées
about the sanctions
de la fragilité des
without
personnes
consideration the fragility of people nor their dignity.
sont des graves violations.
There were serious violations that were committed.
Parce qu'on parle de dignité et de fragilité,
Because we're talking about dignity and fragility.
18,
Maître, normalement,
Presiding Judge Maître, normally the time available to you has finished.
nous allons chercher une solution.
However, we're going to try and find a compromise solution.
Comme nous nous arrêtons,
As we're stopping at 11 o'clock,
la Chambre vous offre les
the Chamber offers you the remaining 10 minutes to organise yourselves in such a way that when you start again, we can start with the next witness. Is that
beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames les juges, je vais
okay?
surfer, survoler, si vous me
Your Honours, if I will surf, if you allow me to put it that way, in order to not use up all the time, in order to remain within the timing that was set, the time frame that was set by your chamber, and I'm going to quickly go to the conclusion of my remarks. Presiding Judge, thank you very much. Please go ahead, Counsel.
Lorsque
Counsel,
Abar 45,
when I hear
bar 18,
witness
et
4528118
Abar 45 379 bar 18, la dignité et la
and
fragilité apparaissent
45379118, when I hear them speak, that dignity and fragility appear in their words and their allegations, I would say with you that AB 4537918 says very well, I was 18 years old when it came to the rebel occupation in 2012, and they found me in the street accompanied by my friends. I was smoking a cigarette when they stopped me and they beat me.
L'abondance de ces faits me pousse à
The
citer,
abundance of such acts,
comme l'a fait si bien mon confrère,
as my colleague said,
vers la fin de ces
well, takes me quickly to his final remarks, where the American philosopher William James said that the truth is too rich to be seized with just from one particular perspective. And I think that your chamber needs to have the abundance and diversity of perspectives of at this stage of the proceedings that come from the mass of victims that we represent. This mass of victims from AB 452818 who says 4526518, I viewed the spectacle of jihadist amputation in 2012. I saw a man having an amputation in public.
Le but
And the aim of the publicity of proceedings was to show this example, that the conduct not to be followed. When you infringe Sharia law, the victim says, Your Honor, we haven't stopped reminding them if the jihadists kept to the public executions for the sanctions issued. Today, the victims also want the justice for them to be public. Your Honor, I do not want to abuse your patience further. I shall conclude with a reference to the Nobel Prize winner, in his work, in which he states on page 101 that testifying is an essential act for the good functioning or the proper functioning of justice. To testify is to relive. It implies an enormous degree of courage and an incommensurate strength. Your Honour, Your Honours, all these victims expect from your chamber, after the proceedings, at this stage of the procedure, that if they take the path of truth, so that justice may be rendered to them. I say this and I finish. Thank you, Your Honour, Your Honours, colleagues. I'd like to thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Maître.
Thank you, Maître Kasongo, for your presentation. It was brilliant and detailed. And in your presentation you have highlighted the words of victims themselves. I would like to thank you. Before concluding our first session, I would like to ensure with the registry that communication has been re-established and that immediately when we come back we shall start with our witness. Is that correct, court officer?
Yes, Mr. President. We will establish a connection and then we will test it. As soon as we come back, we can have the witness testimony.
Alors, je me tourne vers
So I now have to turn to Maître Sitter. It's in our programme that when we come back, it's the testimony of witness that shall start. Counsel, yes, that's exactly right. But I'd like to take this opportunity that is given to me to add to the representation of this morning, because I forgot to mention the assistant in the field who is in Bamako. Mr. Boubacar Maïga.
C'est très bien, merci beaucoup pour.
Very well. Thank you very much for this clarification. It's important for the record. It is now 11 o'clock, nearly 1 minute to 11, and we shall come back at 11:30. Court is suspended.